Last week we started talking about current events with the emphasis on the current, because water has current, air has current. And when we talk about current, sometimes that can be a gentle current, or sometimes it can be a very strong current. So we think about with weather, we have a soft breeze, and sometimes we have a hurricane or a tornado. And even with water, sometimes we have still waters, or we can have a tsunami, or we can just have waters that slowly drift. Or we can even in waters have undercurrent, which we cannot see, but once they get a hold of you, you could be in trouble. And we have current events, so things that are going on today, philosophy of people, teaching, a way of life, decisions people make. The search for truth, if there even is such a thing, that's what we talked about last week, the source of truth, or even is there such a thing as absolute truth? Is there something that we can really know? And I think to a large extent, our world does believe in truth, and that's why so many people continue to learn and grow and study. And one of the truths that people are trying to understand even is the origin of man, which is important for us to understand where we've come from. What's it all about? What's the purpose? What's the meaning of life? And so our lesson today is about the divine design, and are there alternatives? What is really being taught in the world as far as where it all began? And I'm sure you're probably fairly familiar with it, so for most of us, it's just a review, but not very detailed. So this is not going to be a big scientific class with a test at the end, but it's just going to be an overview of what people really think about the very beginning. Where did we come from? Because those questions are important. They affect how we live and the decisions we make. If we understand where we've come from, if we've come from nothing, if we've just spontaneously evolved, and here we are today, so there's no background, there's no history, there's nothing beyond ourselves. We've just reached the superior point of life, and I guess some people would say in the future there will be people even superior to us as human beings. And if that's the way we live, it's going to have an influence on how we live today. What's my meaning? What's my purpose? How do I fit in? Is there any purpose at all in life? I mean, we've come here to worship God today. What's the purpose of that? Or are you going to school? Or are you getting a job? Or are you having a family? Or you enjoying life? Is that the only purpose maybe? Just to have as much fun as you can possibly have? To do things that would seem natural or exciting or would meet your feelings of how you should live? Is that what life is really all about? Why am I here? And so how you answer the first question has a lot to do with how you're going to answer the second question. Why am I here? What's the point? What's the purpose? What's the meaning of life? And that's also going to dictate, well, where am I going? Obviously, if we've just evolved and, we're going to die, then we're just going to go back to dust and we'll be out of existence forever. We'll just be, well, you won't really. You'll just be dust, which I don't know how you feel about that, but, that's it. So if that's the end, then yes, in this life, you might as well just enjoy as much as you possibly can, because eventually it's just going to be over and it'll be finished, it'll be complete, and you'll be gone. And you could say, well, but who would remember me when I'm gone? Isn't that one of the big things people want? They want to be remembered. They want to make some big scientific discovery. They want to write that song that people are going to be singing for generations. They're going to paint that artwork, or they're going to make some kind of big impact on life. And sometimes people, I believe even today, unfortunately, think I'm going to be as evil and wicked as I possibly can be so that I'd be remembered. So people want to be remembered, but you know what that really means? Nothing. Like, who cares, right? Because we are nothing, we're all going to go back to nothing, and even the people that remember you, eventually they'll be dust too. So there's really no purpose in life. Now, I'm not saying, well, let's talk about God so all of a sudden we can have a nice purpose and have meaning, and so we're going to make up all kinds of fairy tales and all kinds of these stories to make us all feel good, and in this life we'll just have our own construct, and then eventually we'll just go back to dust anyway. No, that's not really what I'm saying, but I'm saying, but if we can start with the beginning, what would the beginning look like? What would it look like if we could go back to the beginning? Where did the beginning come from? So apparently there's one religion in the world that's fairly prominent, and that's evolution. We've basically come from nothing. And so the evolutionary theory right now, and it changes all the time, and I understand that the scientists say we've discovered something new, there's something more. I remember when we were in school, when they talked about even the age of the universe, it was nowhere near 13.5 billion years old, but that's what they would say today to make everything fit and everything make sense. It was all 13 billion years old. Now that's kind of one thing to believe, and it's kind of like, that's kind of hard to believe that everything that we have is that old. And you look at our universe, it's, like to me, it doesn't look that old, right? I mean, you think about, you look at a star and you think, boy, that's a long, I can't make a candle, I can't even make my flashlight last 13 billion years. Like, it's still shining, it's still bright, it still works, and how things are coming together. So that's just kind of odd to think 13 billion is a long time, that things are actually getting better over time. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But the other thing is really, I kind of wish that they didn't try to explain where it all kind of came from, because they say, look how big the universe is. And, the going theory is that it all was in a small little package, a small little container, the size of a pinhead. And I know they probably got to have some reason why they make it so small. I'd be like, why didn't they just make it as big as the world? Because to think that I don't even know if we could fit the church building in a pinhead. We're talking about the entire cosmos in a pinhead. So all that matter and energy were in there. And then one day, 13 billion years ago, it exploded. And when it exploded, it expanded. Now they're saying, we look at the universe and it's expanding. And you read the Bible and go, no, that couldn't be true. But they say what it is, when it first exploded, in well under a second, let's put like a thousandth of a second, it separated so quickly. And it wasn't just expanding at that point. It was immediate that it all came out. So that's what they say. That's, and I know for us that aren't scientists, it kind of like sounds a little bit unbelievable to me. Like that's kind of sounds like a tall story. It sounds like somebody thought this up, but it doesn't seem very logical. But I'm not a scientist. But all this matter and all this energy that we have today was in that place. Now, all that matter and energy that was in the pinhead, or the size of a pinhead anyway, I know it wasn't a pinhead, but maybe I'm the pinhead, I know, I get it. All of that, I wonder where that came from. Anybody have any ideas, Because that seems to me, when I look at our universe, and I don't even have one of those big telescopes, it seems like a lot of stuff, and it seems like a lot of energy. Where did all that come from? To even kind of get in that. So not a lot of answers. And I understand that. It's kind of it's an evolving kind of science. Keep looking at it, trying to figure out what it's all about. Or there could be, another, I know there's several theories out there, but this is what we believe as Christians, right? And I know the scientific community sounds very unscientific. That sounds like very unreasonable. That doesn't even seem to make sense. So I know I kind of said to them, it doesn't really make sense what you're saying, and they're looking at me saying what I believe doesn't really make sense. But what does this really say? What does the Bible really help us with? So sometimes the Bible, for instance, does not set out to prove there is a God. It kind of just assumes that people believe that there's a God. Because for thousands of years, people believed in some kind of a God. Now, not everybody believed in the God of the Bible, but everybody believed there was something out there, some God or gods, plural, to be worshipped. And so that's why we have so many world religions, and even when you go into areas where, maybe modern humanity has not gone, and we find these very native or very old communities, they still worship. So most people believed in God, but not everybody. I understand that. But here's just a lesson of logic is this is right from the Bible, from Hebrews chapter 3, verse 4. Every house is built by someone. I mean, I don't know, do we have some people that say, well, no, you can't say every house. You can't say every house was built by somebody. Some houses could have just shown up. They could have just evolved. They could have just built themselves. They could have just materialized. I've never met anybody that said that about any house. I mean, even the old houses. Like even the pyramids. I don't know if anybody's ever said evolution. It just describes it. Just rocks started forming, I've never heard anybody say that. That's, for nobody, that's not a plausible explanation. But this is just saying, do you realize every house? Now, houses are fairly, especially today, are fairly intricate, right? I mean, not only do you have the wood, the sides, the roof, the windows, but then you've got also the internal elements, like the plumbing and the electrical and the heating and, the floor and the ceiling and the drywall, and you got nails and screws. And, I mean, does that make sense? But how do you make a house today? Well, generally, you have to design the house, and then you have to build the house. And you want to know something? You probably don't know this, but I know it, because I've got a house that even sometimes you have to maintain it. Well, you knew that, right? You just let it be on its own. Like, my analogy is, I've got a truck. It's like over 15 years old, and it's starting to rust. So I have this brilliant idea. Some rust is developing. But if I wait long enough, all that rust will reverse. The metal molecules will begin growing again. And eventually all the rust will be covered over with brand new metal and nice clear coat paint. It's going to be brand new. So that's my goal. So don't come to me and say, your truck's a little more rusty than it used to be. It's like, bro, wait for the evolutionary process to happen. Like, you say, I'm out of my mind. It doesn't work that way, people, right? So this is all he's saying. Just think, it's kind of logical. Every house is built by something. So the builder of all things is God. So he's saying this world didn't just happen, and that wasn't even the point he was making back then. Like he wasn't trying to convince. This was written to Christians that meet in a church like this. They didn't have to be convinced. He's just kind of throwing it out there. This is a very logical thing to believe. It's like what everybody believes. Now, Psalm 14 verse 1 says, the fool says in his heart there is no God. So the fool is somebody who does not really know, who's not really looked into the facts, or has not been able to use logic, or have not really kind of looked at the evidence to say there is no God. And part of the reason is because they are corrupt, and they do abominable deeds, and there's none that does good. And so people are not living like they should, and they don't want any accountability. They don't want to think that they've come from anywhere or they're going to have to go anywhere, so I can live free. So if I can get rid of God, then it can change the way I live. So the picture here is probably just an example of what Isaac Newton made. He lived back in the 16 and early 1700s. Isaac Newton was a mathematician, physicist, astronomer, theologian, and author, and he's described in his time as a natural philosopher, and he is one of the most significant scientists ever, really. So the idea is, here's the story, and I'm just going to say it's a story, that Isaac Newton made a model of the universe. Again, kind of looked like this. It's probably not it. And it had moving mechanical parts. And you turn the handle and so you can see here it's got the different planets, and the planets even have different moons around it, and they would all go as the gears allowed them to go. And so obviously it was designed and it was built. And then one of his friends came in that did not even believe in God, and kind of, I guess, was an evolutionist. And he came in and he was quite impressed with it, the way it was, all set up and kind of like what the universe would be like. And, he turned it and everything was moving. And he said, who made this? And Isaac Newton said, nobody. And he said, well, maybe you didn't understand what I said. I asked you who had made this, and he again said nobody. And his friend said, well, what kind of fool do you think I am that would think or believe that this model was not built by anybody? And so Isaac Newton went over and he said, this is just a tiny, simple replica of the universe, and yet you are demanding that it needed a builder. Well, I was kind of looking up that story a little bit this week. And you know what some people say? That was just some made-up story by them Christians. Never happened. Well, here's the big question. Why would you be so upset that Isaac Newton did or did not actually do this? Because the point is the same, isn't it? The point still fits, whether this is even a true story or not. So don't let people say it wasn't even a true story. Well, let's make another story. So, I mean, there's all kinds of illustrations that we can give about what is the existence. Where does this come from? Does it really need a designer, and does it really need a builder? I know back years ago, the illustration that we often gave was, you have a junkyard and all these old cars. And a tornado, if a tornado came through the junkyard, what do you think would happen? So what are the odds? Let's just put it this way. What are the odds if a tornado came through this junkyard? What are the odds that after the tornado left, you looked out and you saw that this tornado assembled a large airplane? Now, I could say it's possible, because what do those cars have? Metal? What does the airplane have? Metal. Do those cars have windows? Yes. Does it have an engine? Yes. Well, yeah, but this has got a jet engine. They only had a gasoline. Well, it's still an engine. Give it some brake. Of course it can do this. There was a lot of material in that junkyard. It had enough material to make this, didn't it? Well, probably. Well, don't those cars have seats? Yes, the airplanes have seats. They have accelerator? Yeah, they've got wheels. They got everything. And that's starting with something. What are the odds of this happening? Well, apparently the odds are pretty good. You want to know why? Amazon delivers. Okay, all right. It's Prime. Okay. Don't be buying Amazon now. I know it's for some people. It's like, oh, you just, trigger word. Start shopping. No. What are the odds? Well, I'm guessing it could happen. Scientifically, I guess it could. Listen. Here's the big thing. Given enough time, it could happen. All right. So what I would say is, this tornado came through the junkyard every day for 5 million years. Could it still do one of these? I mean, just given enough time. It could, couldn't it? And the reason you'd say no is because the nature of tornadoes is destroyed. Like, have you ever heard a tornado went through a community and now just even one thing in the community is better? Well, maybe people's relationships are better because they all come together and work together, whatever. But, it doesn't fix things in the community. It always tears them apart. Why is that? Because that's the nature of life, right? Like, I'm not as good looking as I used to be, which is kind of funny because I was never good looking. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, I'm just getting older, and I realize that. But that's a part of life. As things get older, they start breaking, and this is called the law of entropy. Things start breaking down, things start deteriorating. I mean, Jesus said the same thing, right? Why do you invest in this world where moths destroy and rust corrodes and even thieves break in and steal? Why are you investing in this life? You can invest in the kingdom of heaven where it's going to last forever. Where are you going to put your treasure? Jesus said, where your treasure is, that's where your heart's going to be. But the idea is, what are the possibilities? Well, it's not a very good possibility. So maybe it will help if we look at some verses. This is the Psalm 19, the song that we sang. Listen to what this says. The heavens declare, they shout, they're telling. You can't ignore it. Like every time you go out, it's kind of like, look at all the stars in heaven. Look at all the light. And even back when that was written, which was about 2,700 years ago, they probably didn't see as much light as we do. Now, when it was dark there, it was probably real dark because they didn't have all the street lights on and the car lights on and that kind of thing. But they couldn't see as far as we can because we've got all these telescopes and we're looking now into new galaxies, right? And we're saying, look how big and expansive, look at how this is. This is amazing. It's telling a story. And the story it tells is, this did not just happen. There's got to be something behind this. This is no cosmic accident. The heavens declare the glory of God, the glory of a designer, the glory of a master, the glory of an artist, right? This is God creating. And the sky proclaims his handiwork. So we may say that's like a sunset, or maybe that's beautiful clouds, Or maybe that's just a really blue, sunny day. We can see the power and the glory and the wonder of God. Day to day pours out speech. Night to night, it reveals knowledge. So what the psalmist is saying, we can look and see. We don't see God. We see what God has created. We see evidence of God. It's evidence because it is so wonderfully and marvelously made. So that's Psalm 19. The heavens declare. It says, it goes throughout the whole world. Every language, people see it and they can know it. So this is what God says. Doesn't set out to prove anything as far as his existence. He doesn't give us 35 scientific facts about how we can know that God exists. But it just simply says in the beginning. So what does this say? There was a point in time where things began. Now, to a certain degree, I guess you could say the Big Bang believes there was a certain point when things began. But the interesting thing is, again, the Big Bang does not explain where all the stuff in the pinhead came from. Genesis explains where these things came from, and God spoke them into existence. Now, you're a Christian, assumedly, or at least you're seeking for God. Me too. Now, people can say, well, where did God come from? And I could say, that's a great question. I don't really know all the answers about where God came from. But I know in science, we know matter has not always existed, and we know energy has not always existed, right? They can't be here forever. They've got to have some kind of a beginning. Now with God, I would say he's outside of matter. He's outside of energy. He's outside of time. He's outside of our universe. He's outside of our physical laws. He made our physical laws, but he's outside. And so he has always existed. And I know some people could say, well, that's far-fetched, but it certainly makes sense. And actually makes more sense than saying matter and energy have always existed, because there's no way anybody could convince me that matter and energy spontaneously began. Even Big Bang the theory, the evolutionists don't believe that. They say it was there and it blew up, but they don't really have the source. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, darkness over the... So Genesis 1 goes through how God created the world in sequence, in steps about how things happened, right? And so it's kind of the story of the beginning. And so that's all God has to say about it. And people then either decide they're going to believe it or not believe it, and he realizes not everyone's going to believe, and they have their own reasons for doing that. Here are some things that we do know about God. In Isaiah chapter 40, this was written about 2,750 years ago. It is he who sits on the circle of the earth. The circle, who knew the earth was circular? It was a sphere, it was round, the circle of the earth. Well, thousands of years, people thought the earth was flat, but apparently God was sitting on the circle of sits above the circle of the earth. And its inhabitants are like grasshopper, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. You know, I have a problem with this verse, and this is my problem. It's actually not with this verse. It's with the evolutionists. They've actually stolen the language. You look at how they describe the Big Bang. They say, you know, initially it was a large explosion, and they would say it's inflation, which means the price went up when you learn. No, that's not what inflation means. It just meant it was so quick, it just expanded. And then and they tell you today, you know, the universe is continuing to expand, and then they'll say these words, and it stretches out. It's like, you can't say the universe stretches out. That's my word. That's the Bible. Almost 3,000 years ago, it says he stretched out the heavens. And our scientists are saying, well, we've just discovered something that it's not all just stable and stagnant. It's stretching out. It's like, well, if you'd read your Bible, you would have known that. You wouldn't have had to spend all this time trying to figure it out. It's what it says. He stretched out the heavens, the stars and the universe, and that's what he did. And that's how he created the world. So people say, but, you know, the Bible is so incompatible with science. It's like, no, the Bible actually establishes some of the very basic scientific facts that we all know and believe. Here's some other words, some other verses. He stretches out the north over the void and hangs the earth on nothing. So the earth is free floating. How it stays in place, we all don't understand all the sequence of that, but back then that wouldn't even make sense. Something must be holding on to especially if it's flat. So again, they had a lot of the stories and the mythologies and of how the earth works. It's flat, it's on the back of a big sea turtle that's swimming, So I had all kinds of theories, but nobody was saying, the earth is round and it's just kind of hanging on its own. And yet today, most people, I know there's people that still believe flat earth, but most people believe in exactly what this says. He's inscribed the circle of the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. As the hosts of heaven cannot be numbered and the sands of the sea cannot be measured. So we look in telescopes and say, we can't even count all the stars, and we know there's even more beyond what we can see. But back in that day, people could actually sit down and they thought they could count stars. They kind of count them all up, and sometimes they came up to numbers like 1,000 or 2,000 stars. That's all. And if you said, you can't count them, it's like, yeah, I just did. There's like 2,322. That's how many stars there are. I just counted them. But he's saying in the Bible, they can't be counted. And today, science says, we can't count them all. Who would ever thought of that? Oh, the Bible would tell you that they cannot be counted. The streams flow into the sea, and yet the sea's never full. I wonder why that happens. Think about that. Now, we understand how weather works today. Evaporation takes the water up in a vapor, goes into clouds. The clouds blow over from Lake Michigan, dumps all the snow and rain on the people that are living in West Michigan, right? And sometimes it comes over to us, too. But we understand that. They didn't understand that back then. How and why rain comes down from the... We don't understand. But we've got it now. But this is what God has said. So he's given us information and clues about even how science works. So maybe that's helpful for us to understand how things work. So Romans chapter 1 in verse 19, this is what it says, for what can be known about God is plain to them. And he's talking about the creation, the created world. When we look around, he's saying it can be known. Because God's shown it to them. That kind of goes with the Psalm 19 verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God. Night to night and day by day, they pour forth speech and declare God's glory. God's invisible attributes, his eternal power, divine nature, have been clearly perceived, clearly seen, clearly understood since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that people are without excuse. People cannot say, well, I didn't know. I couldn't figure that out. You can't even, with God, give the excuse, well, I went to school so much and they kind of told me once too often that there's no such thing as God. It just happened accidentally, randomly, all by itself, from a big explosion, from a pinhead. And I just ended up believing it. God said that there's no excuse. I've given you enough evidence to see and to realize this is creativity. This is a design. This is a builder. This is somebody that even continues to hold things in its place. So God is not only the creator of the world, but the sustainer of the world. And so he's given us evidence. And we find that throughout the Bible and how God has given us information. In Jeremiah chapter 9 and verse 5. Here's the interesting thing is, Jeremiah is not talking about pagan nations. He's talking about his own people. It'd be like today talking to people that call themselves Christians and people that actually believe in God. This is what he's saying to them. Everyone deceives their neighbor. There's no one who speaks the truth. They have taught their tongue to speak lies. They weary themselves committing iniquity. That's sin. That's evil. That's rebelling against God. That's what they do. Heaping oppression upon oppression. That's the way you treat people. Not very well. Abusing and using. Taking advantage of people for your own purposes and your own benefit and for your own advancement. And deceit upon deceit, and they refuse to know me, declares the Lord. That's the way the people were living back then. I don't want to acknowledge God. I want to live the way I want. And so we gather enough people that think like us, and as long as you can tell me the lie, I can tell you the lie. And we can live however we want, and we think we're free. And we think there's going to be no accountability. And there's no consequences to our decisions. We could just do as we will. And that's the way they lived back then. And that's the way some people live today. They just find people that can tell them what they want to hear so they can have license to live how they want to live. See, commercial, you always have to have a commercial at some point. So we do have these handouts. I want to make sure everybody gets one. They're in the bulletin, but I know some people read the bulletin electronically, but if you can make sure you get one before you leave. So this is like in 3 weeks. Steve was having some kind of minor medical problems, depending how you consider minor, a detached retina. Okay, so that was like 3 weeks ago. So he wasn't even, I don't know if he knew he was coming or not, but I wasn't sure if he was coming, but he is coming. So it's kind of real quick. It's in 3 weeks he's going to be here. So he's going to be doing this seminar that's going to help us as we share our faith with our friends and neighbors. That's the Saturday portion, just learning how to be more effective and maybe have a little bit of courage and maybe have some information about how we can share our faith with our friends and neighbors and family, that kind of thing. And then on Sunday morning and Sunday evening, he's going to speak here. So Sunday night, Monday night, and Tuesday night, he's going to have some lessons that it'd be really helpful if we could bring our family and friends and the people that aren't Christians so they can come and hear a little bit more about the Bible. So that's kind of what he's going to be doing. If you pick up the form, it's going to have a lot more information. And next week we'll have invitations that you can actually give to other people. The one you're getting today is just for yourself to know what's going on. So Hebrews 11, verse 1. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. And so, we have to have faith in God. It's not all, we've never met him. We weren't there at the beginning when he created the world. So we have faith in him, we trust in him, but it's not a blind faith, it has evidence. Just as somebody who is a scientist that does believe in the evolutionary process, they have to have a lot of faith. I mean, if you kind of just study it a little bit, you're thinking, boy, they take leaps of faith all kinds of times, based on time and possibilities and origins and how things happen and why things happen and what caused this. And, they're just assuming things and making up things, and they say, well, we believe it. We believe this is a possibility is all they could really say. So, but we have faith in God. We trust God, but it's not a blind faith. And hopefully you've seen today, even just looking at the scriptures, that there's evidence to say there is a designer and there's a creator, and the Bible is supportive of that idea of the designer and the creator of the universe. So we do have faith. But Hebrews 11 and verse 3 says it's by faith, and it's not the blind faith. Oh, I really wish there was a God, so let's make one up and we'll follow him. No, it's based in evidence. So it's by faith we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was made out of things that are invisible. So what he's saying is, matter at one time did not exist. How did it come into existence? God's powerful enough to speak it into existence. Energy has not always existed. It's powerful enough for God to speak it in existence. Well, and how does that even make sense? Because in science, we know both matter and energy are going from a complex position into something simpler. In other words, it's breaking down. It's getting older. It's not becoming more sophisticated. It's not becoming more advanced. It's kind of, life works the other way, right? Energy, as you use it, it wears down. So over time, it's saying God made the universe and everything in it. And that's how it came into existence. But we believe it by faith and because of what we see and what God has revealed to us. Now, he hasn't given us all the answers. We still have a lot of questions. But we know that God is the one that we can trust and we follow. So that's kind of where we are as Christians. And I understand that there may be people that are not Christians that have a hard time with that and say, that still doesn't make sense, or I still have a lot of questions. And that's fine if you have a lot of questions. I still have a lot of questions too. So that's all right. But we learn and grow, right? And we still develop. We're not going to have all the answers until we get to heaven, right? So we'll get the answers then. Well, if we can encourage you, some people may be ready to make a decision, say, I want to follow God. I want to know more about him. I want to explore this. I have some questions. I want to sit down with somebody and talk. If we can help you, let us know. We'd love to do that. If you want to know more about the Bible, know more about the church, know more about God's plan for your life, know more about the evidence of the existence of God and what he has created. If you want to make a decision to follow Christ today, we can help you with that too. Let's stand, we'll sing this song. Let us know how we can be a blessing to you.